Australian Prime Minister Anthony Albanese vows stricter gun controls after a terror attack at Sydney's Bondi Beach killed 15 people. Well, Australia already has some of the world's strictest gun laws, and now states have agreed to immediately toughen access to the weapons following that mass shooting in Bondi yesterday. For more on this and what gun reform could look like across Australia, we're joined by Maya Arguello Gomez. She is a lecturer in Law and Criminology at the Swinburne University of Technology. Maya, first, despite Australia's very strict gun laws, concerning weaknesses have been exposed in this Bondi Beach attack. Talk to us about what concerns you most.
I think the most serious question that's come about from all the discussions today especially is how could the individuals involved actually have access to the weapons that they had access to? So I think that's a really serious question that has come about. And it's also meant that there is a focus on what it actually means to look at strong reform in the future. So I know that the National Cabinet did meet this afternoon. They have resolved to strengthen gun laws. What that means, though, is actually going to come out in the conversations with the relevant states and territories.
Interesting, because ever since the Port Arthur attack in 1996, there were many changes, many reforms that were lauded as good. Surely there are lessons that we can take away from this, moving into, as you mentioned, Anthony Albanese, calling for tighter gun laws. What could those laws look like on the ground?
Yeah, so coming out of the Port Arthur incident, we certainly saw a change in the way that the Australian states and territories dealt with gun control. So as part of the reform in that space, there was more of an effort by the states to agree on certain minimum thresholds. So this was looking at making sure that if individuals wanted to use a gun, that there were appropriate firearm licence programs and mechanisms coming out of that. This is certainly something that is going to be looked at by the Cabinet. So they have decided that they would like to strengthen the National Firearms Agreement across the states and territories. So this could actually mean strengthening the way in which the application process is followed through with, looking at mental health provisions, and it's certainly something that the states and territories are going to have to work together on.
That is interesting. I'd like to unpack that further, but I wonder, would you agree that even if laws are tightened, hurdles do remain? For example, is it easy to implement across all states? Is there enough information sharing, for example, between police, health services, as well as the licensing bodies to ensure this doesn't happen again?
So at the moment, what actually happens in the states and territories is that while there is an overarching agreement at the federal level that there will be a consensus around approaches in terms of firearms, the states and territories are responsible for implementing those particular procedures. So in terms of strengthening the procedures at that state and territory level, that will need to go back onto the states and territories themselves. What this means in a practical sense is that the states and territories will need to work with the federal government around what that gun reform would actually look like on the ground level, because essentially those states and territories will be the ones responsible for implementation of any of those actions that come out at that federal level. So this could mean that the information required in terms of follow-up when you're looking at registration will fall back onto those states and territories. So you've got issues in terms of funding, who is going to fund this, what does that mean in terms of actual processes. So there's quite a lot of work to be done in that space. But I guess the big takeaway at the moment is the states and territories are actually on board with reforming. It's just going to come down to what does that look like and how is that effectively going to be implemented.
Yeah, I understand that. Now, when you look around to, say, Asian countries, for example, the way they deal with gun control through mental health checks, how many guns a person can own. I wonder, are there any risk-reducing takeaways that perhaps might work in Australia?
So at the moment, if an individual applies for a gun license or if they apply to renew, they need to essentially self-disclose whether there are any mental health issues or if there are any other issues that prohibit them from being classed as a fit and proper person. There is discussion around strengthening that ability, not only from an applicant self-disclosing, but also if there's any potential issues that may come out from contravention of particular laws, criminality, for example. So there's certainly discussions in that space around what might it look like if an individual doesn't self-disclose? How will collaboration work between medical practitioners? How will collaboration work between intelligence professionals? Information sharing, for example. So I think these are all legitimate queries and questions that are being raised at the moment. How will these particular things actually work? And how will that work to strengthen the landscape within Australia at the moment, because there's certainly a need to be able to do that, but what that looks like in a practical sense, I think still needs to be worked out.
Right. Well, appreciate you coming by and speaking with us on this. Been speaking there with Arguello Gomez, lecturer in Law and Criminology at the Swinburne University of Technology.